Trickle takes the lead.
In the early 1990s, there was a sound that burned itself straight into my memory. The roar of an engine at full throttle, merging with Hans Zimmer's blazing score. The painted lines of the racetrack streaked past in a blur, and that surge of adrenaline is still as vivid every time I think back to it. For me, that was the most priceless moment in the entire film. But just like a NASCAR machine that must endure thousands of brutal testing hours before it ever rolls onto the track, the journey that created this cinematic powerhouse was a race filled with unbelievable, almost insane twists and turns. Can you believe it? Crashes on set so real they were genuinely terrifying. Tom Cruise going all in and smashing a $100,000 camera just to capture the perfect shot. Total and complete skepticism. NASCAR itself once had absolutely no faith in the Hollywood filmmakers. Now, let's pull back the curtain on the 20 shocking secrets that forged the very soul of Days of Thunder, 1990. 20. Top Gun on the ground, the golden formula that created the NASCAR phenomenon. Anyone who was obsessed with Top Gun in the 1980s will surely remember the surge of excitement when Days of Thunder arrived in 1990. The legendary producing duo Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simpson decided to recreate the same golden formula that had delivered their earlier massive success. Ultimate speed, the swagger of youth, and the undeniable star power of Tom Cruise. This time, instead of the endless skies filled with F-14 fighter jets, they brought audiences down onto the scorching asphalt of NASCAR to create Days of Thunder, 1990. Cole Trickle is essentially Maverick behind the wheel, a gifted but rebellious driver. Rowdy Burns stands as the formidable rival in the mold of Iceman, and a devastating crash forces the hero to confront his greatest fear. The biggest gamble was putting NASCAR, at that time still considered a regional sport, onto the big screen. Yet Days of Thunder transformed seemingly dry concepts like pit stops and race strategy into global pop culture icons. When you watch the film again and feel that familiar emotional rhythm, from arrogance to the fall to the rise back up, that is not a coincidence. That is Top Gun, rewritten in the thunderous roar of a V8 engine. 19. NASCAR had absolutely no faith in Hollywood. Back then, in stark contrast to the excitement of the fans, the people in charge of NASCAR, especially the legendary chairman Bill France Jr., were deeply wary. In their eyes, Hollywood looked like a group of outsiders, simply waiting to turn a serious, deeply regional sport into an exaggerated spectacle. Their fears were not without reason. They were afraid that crashes would be blown out of proportion into mindless, destructive car-wrecking chaos. They worried that filmmakers would push aside the technical precision, the race strategy, and the professionalism, focusing only on explosions and blazing accidents to attract audiences. They feared the image of the sport would be distorted by melodramatic romance or by the creation of an impossibly perfect Tom Cruise-style superhero. Standing before this gamble, NASCAR hesitated. Would this become an opportunity to elevate the sport, or a catastrophic collapse of its reputation in front of the camera? To prove themselves to NASCAR, the Days of Thunder crew came to the track as apprentices. They observed, they listened, they asked about car setups, fuel strategy, and the pressure of every single lap. And NASCAR began to realize that this film had not come to mock them. It had come to bring their world to the big screen. The suspicion gradually turned into cooperation. 18 crash scenes so real they were terrifying. I still remember the moment those cars slammed into each other. I actually shivered. It was terrifying. Back then, CGI practically didn't exist. There was no way to digitally create a stock car spinning at 200 miles per hour. If you wanted to see a real crash, you had to send real cars onto a real racetrack. And that is exactly what the filmmakers did. They used real NASCAR machines with real steel frames, real engines, and ran them at speeds close to actual race conditions. Cameras were mounted directly onto the cars, placed right next to the concrete walls, or buried inside the crash zones, positions where no one could possibly predict from which angle a car would come hurtling in. When a car lost control, it did not perform for the sake of a beautiful shot. It spun, it slid, it slammed into the wall with enough force to bend the steel chassis. The sound you hear is real, the brutal impact of metal smashing into metal. Many cars were completely destroyed in a single take. Debris flew straight past the camera positions, and inside every one of those collisions was a driver experiencing real G-forces, not a visual effect. Even real-life NASCAR drivers who were present on set admitted that the scenes in the film were not Hollywoodized. They were frighteningly close to what real crashes look like in actual racing. What about you? Did those scenes give you goosebumps? Leave a comment below and share your feelings with us. 17. To create a film about speed, 35 cars were left in ruins. If you think what was destroyed in Days of Thunder were just props, then you don't truly understand how this film was made. These were not hollow car shells designed to explode for a pretty shot. They were real stock cars, racing machines built to run at speeds of over 300 kilometers per hour, with steel chassis, V8 engines, suspension systems, and NASCAR spec setups. Throughout the production, a record of destruction was set when around 35 cars were completely totaled in violent crashes and rollovers. One crew member later admitted with bitterness that a lot of cars were wrecked even though they were never meant to be wrecked, because at real racing speeds, a collision does not give you a second chance. When a stock car loses control, it does not break apart gently like it does in the movies. It crushes itself under the brutal force of its own speed. In 1990, the price of a single stock car ranged from $70,000 to $100,000, an enormous amount at the time. Yet the production turned $2.8 million into piles of twisted scrap metal in just a few seconds on screen. Looking back at those scenes, you realise that an entire fortune was poured onto the racetrack for the sake of a level of realism that is almost frightening. 6th, Tom Cruise destroyed a $100,000 camera. One thing a rookie driver needs to know about stock cars is that they are built to turn left. I've only just learned that myself. At the Volusia County track, the young Tom Cruise learned a $100,000 lesson in a way he would never forget. In the early 1990s, when former NASCAR driver Hut Stricklin was working as a stunt performer on the set of Days of Thunder, he passed that crucial piece of advice on to Tom Cruise. He really didn't understand what I was talking about, Stricklin later recalled. Right after their conversation during a filming day at Volusia County Speedway, a track located 24 miles west of Daytona Beach, Florida, Stricklin watched as Cruise, famous for his intense enthusiasm, climbed into one of the production's powerful cars and blasted down the front straight. Stricklin said, "He turned left, and the car turned left. But when he turned back to the right, the car lost control and lightly tapped the wall. It seemed minor, but it damaged a brand new high-end camera that the crew had mounted on the right side of the star's car." At that moment, Stricklin realised that his advice about stock cars was finally starting to make sense to him. 5th, filming began before the script was finished. Doesn't it feel strange? During the making of Days of Thunder, the project was launched while the script was still in development. The original idea was nurtured by Tom Cruise after he was exposed to the world of NASCAR racing, but the screenplay kept being revised throughout the entire process, even after filming had already begun. The shooting, while finishing the script approach, kept the atmosphere on set in a constant race against time. There were days when the dialogue was rewritten in the morning and had to be filmed in the afternoon. This left the actors, especially Cruise, with almost no time to prepare properly. It was in that context that a small incident occurred during a driving scene. Cruise had to read his lines from cue cards taped to the windshield, which caused him to lose concentration and resulted in a minor collision. After that, the crew changed their working method and equipped him with an earpiece so he could receive his dialogue directly while performing high-speed scenes. Starting production before the script was completed was not uncommon in Hollywood at the time, but for a film that required such a high level of technical precision and safety as Days of Thunder, it created enormous pressure for the entire crew. 14. The movie's NASCAR car almost won a real race in Phoenix. During the making of Days of Thunder, the crew entered the so-called picture cars, real race cars fitted with cameras, directly into actual NASCAR events to capture authentic footage. According to the plan, these cars had to qualify, start at the back of the field, run for about 100 miles to gather enough material, and then voluntarily pull out so they would not affect the official race results. But at the Auto Works 500 on November 4th, 1989, at Phoenix International Raceway, things went much further than expected. Driver Bobby Hamilton, behind the wheel of the film's number 51 car, Mellow Yellow, performed so impressively that he secured a strong starting position and even moved up into the lead group. The situation forced Rick Hendrick, owner of Hendrick Motorsports and a key figure involved in the project, to radio in during the race to remind him, "Come on Bobby, fall back, let them go by." It was a rare moment. A car built for filming nearly entered the real competition on a NASCAR track. 13th, Daytona Memorial, the Haunted Hospital. You probably still remember the Daytona Memorial Hospital scenes after those horrific crashes. That chilling realism came from the fact that the filmmakers shot in a real hospital instead of building a set in a studio. The scenes were based on real injuries that NASCAR drivers had suffered in real life. In the film, the hospital is called Daytona Memorial, but in reality it is Halifax Health Medical Center, previously often referred to as Halifax Medical Center. The hospital's real name can even be seen on the helicopter that takes Cole Trickle away from the track. In real life, this hospital regularly receives severe accident cases from NASCAR events, serious head and neck injuries, the psychological fear of returning to the track, and more. That is why what the audience sees on screen, from concussions and broken bones to the psychological trauma after crashes and the long recovery process, closely reflects the real experiences of NASCAR drivers. Major crashes do not only leave physical injuries, they also create a deep fear of getting back into the car. Days of Thunder chose this approach so the audience could feel the fragility of the human being behind the helmet. 12. The beach car crash scene is 100% real, no effects. Close your eyes and remember the roar of the engines tearing through the quiet sound of the ocean waves. The sequence where Cole Trickle and Rowdy Burns settle their score by driving rental cars and smashing them to pieces on the beach. At that time, computer-generated effects for large-scale crash scenes were almost impossible in terms of both cost and realism, so the filmmakers relied on practical effects, real cars, real collisions. 2 sedans, a Chevrolet Lumina Euro and a Ford Taurus GL, were used as props. According to multiple behind-the-scenes sources and interviews with crew members, these vehicles were prepared to be completely destroyed during filming, with permission from the vehicle suppliers. The scene was shot on the real sands of Daytona Beach, where the cars charged at each other, slid across the sand, and collided with heavy impact, severely damaging the front bumpers, the windshields, and the body panels. This approach contributed to the film's signature sense of chaos and authenticity, and it also reflected the production's expensive style. To achieve a scene, Tom Cruise almost looked like a professional driver. Isn't it fascinating? Cruz, who had never driven a stock car before, reached speeds of nearly 180 miles per hour, about 290 kilometers per hour, in his very first sessions. Through Hendrick Motorsports, Cruz was given the opportunity to test drive a real stock car at a testing facility and on the major oval tracks in North Carolina. Cruz later recalled that he instantly became addicted to the sensation of speed and grew even more determined to make the film. Before filming began, Cruz went through an intensive training program with the Hendrick team and NASCAR drivers such as Hut Stricklin and Greg Sachs. He ran hundreds of laps on real oval tracks, learning how to stay on the throttle through the continuous left turns, how to control the car at high speed, and how to handle contact situations. Cruz wanted to truly understand what it felt like to be a NASCAR driver rather than simply play the role. So he drove most of the real racing scenes himself, although the most dangerous moments still required professional stunt drivers due to insurance requirements. 10. Witness to a high-speed love story. Let's pull back the curtain on the love story of Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman that began on the set of Days of Thunder. On screen, he was the reckless driver Cole Trickle, and she was the calm and principled Dr. Claire Lewicki. From the tense confrontations between the hot-headed racer and the cool-headed doctor, emotions slowly began to grow, and they did not stop at the script. That chemistry stepped off the screen and into real life, launching a romance that would fill countless pages of the Hollywood press. In later interviews, Kidman said that when she first met Cruise, she was deeply struck by him. She recalled, "He swept away all her defenses. She fell into a wild, passionate love." She also said that when she was in love, she was willing to forget all the plans of her life to follow him. These were statements she shared in Vanity Fair in 2002 and in other interviews with People and Harper's Bazaar. The two began publicly dating during the filming in early 1990. When Days of Thunder was released on June 27, 1990, their relationship had already become a media sensation. About 6 months later, on Christmas Eve, December the 24th, 1990, Cruise and Kidman held a private wedding at a ski resort in Telluride, Colorado. The ceremony was intimate, attended only by close family and friends. At the time, Cruise was 28, Kidman was 23, and it was his second marriage after divorcing Mimi Rogers earlier that same year. 9. Spending $400,000 to renovate an abandoned hotel store. At that time, Simpson was famous for his extravagant lifestyle. He found that the gyms in Daytona Beach did not meet his high standards. He decided to spend $400,000 of Paramount studio money to convert an empty shop inside a hotel into a private gym for himself, complete with a large neon sign reading Days of Thunder. Simpson also kept a wardrobe full of Donna Karan dresses, a high-end fashion brand, to give to attractive women his assistants found on Daytona Beach. The assistants were assigned the task of hunting for beautiful women and bringing them to parties. With Don Simpson's lavish spending and hard-living lifestyle during the Daytona shoot, it further contributed to the swelling production costs. 8. The filming took an enormous amount of time. Some crew members later said they could take 4 months off after the film wrapped because the shooting schedule had been so long. Behind the scenes of Days of Thunder was as tense as the racing scenes themselves. The film was produced by the duo Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer, with a screenplay by Robert Towne, but the production was frequently interrupted by hours-long, heated arguments with director Tony Scott over staging and camera placement. This was the main reason the film was released later than planned. While those debates dragged on for hours, the entire crew had to sit and wait while salaries and overtime kept running. There were days when the team worked 18 to 20 hours, but most of that time was spent waiting rather than shooting. As a result, the schedule slipped badly. The film was originally expected to finish early enough for a Memorial Day 1990 release, but in reality, shooting lasted from late 1989 to early May 1990, about 3 months behind schedule. The budget climbed higher and higher, and the pressure was pushed onto a post-production period that was already extremely rushed. 7. The Poor Birds. Back then, you probably remember the scene where Cole Trickle, Tom Cruise and Rowdy Burns, Michael Rooker, drive rental cars on Daytona Beach to settle their conflict. In the frame, a flock of seabirds gathers on the sand and then scatters into the air as the two cars charge toward them, creating a very cinematic effect. To achieve this shot, the crew spread food across the sand to lure the seagulls into the exact position of the camera. However, on the first take, the cars came in faster than expected, and many of the birds did not manage to take off in time, resulting in some of them being run over. The crew had to stop filming to deal with the situation and adjust their approach. In the following takes, they controlled the speed and staging more carefully, so the birds had enough time to fly up before the cars passed. The scene in the final cut still retains the dramatic image of the flock scattering, but it was executed much more cautiously to avoid repeating the initial incident. 6. Inspired by a notorious NASCAR driver. I bet audiences of Days of Thunder can never forget the character Cole Trickle, built with a personality that is impulsive, confident, and somewhat rebellious. Many details of this character are believed to have been partly inspired by Tim Richmond, a prominent NASCAR driver of the 1980s. Richmond, 1955 to 1989, was famous not only for his talent, especially the 1986 season with 7 wins while driving for Hendrick Motorsports, but also for his rock star lifestyle, charismatic, a party lover, and not entirely in sync with the traditional Southern NASCAR culture. His career ended early due to health problems, and he passed away on August 13, 1989, from complications related to AIDS. At that time, Cruise and screenwriter Robert Towne were researching real-life material for the script, and many observers noticed that Cole carried the shadow of Richmond, a talented and magnetic driver whose style stood outside NASCAR's conventional mold. However, the film did not directly mention Richmond's illness or personal life, keeping only his spirit and distinctive personality in the construction of the character. 5. Almost won without filming it, the Days of Thunder crew's epic fail. During the post-production of Days of Thunder, after principal photography ended around May 1990, the crew discovered a crucial oversight. They did not have a clear shot showing Cole Trickle's number 46 car actually crossing the finish line at the Daytona 500. For a film that places its climax on the final victory, this was a gap that could not be ignored. Meanwhile, the release date of June 27, 1990 had already been set, and they could not return to Daytona International Speedway because the racing season had ended. The only solution was to organise an emergency shoot at another East Coast track, bringing back the cast and crew to capture the necessary angles. The ending that audiences see on screen is actually a combination of existing footage, newly shot material of the finish line moment, and post-production sound. The roar of the crowd, the explosive commentators, and the soaring score to create a complete sense of triumph. This incident is often mentioned as proof of the intense pressure of the production. To put it humorously, the car on screen races confidently toward the finish line, but behind the scenes the entire crew was also sprinting just to make the premiere on time. 4. Feel the car was not in the script. You gotta feel the car, the famous line spoken by Harry Hogg, carries weight because it reflects the true soul of NASCAR. That line did not exist in Robert Towne's original screenplay or any of the early drafts. It came from a real argument on set between the drivers and Tom Cruise about how to drive a NASCAR stock car, technique versus instinct. One side emphasized feel the car, sensing the machine, listening to the engine, feeling the tyres and the balance, rather than relying purely on data or a scripted driving method. The moment was so authentic that director Tony Scott decided to keep it in the film. It remained because it sounded completely natural and perfectly matched Harry's character, an old-school racer who trusted instinct over modern technology. The line became one of the most memorable in the movie, symbolizing the NASCAR philosophy. Racing is not just about technique, but about feeling the car as if it were part of your own body. 3. The secret behind a small role. Few people know this. Behind the high-speed footage were emotional fragments filled with irony and mystery. During the shoot at Daytona Beach, Don Simpson asked screenwriter Robert Towne to write a small role for his then-girlfriend, the young model actress Donna Wilson. The character had only a single short line in the film, yet Wilson remained on set for a long period in Daytona. The relationship between Simpson and Wilson collapsed during the production because Simpson's heavy drug use at the time seriously affected both his personal life and his work. But here is the unexpected twist. In 1994, the man Donna Wilson would marry was none other than Tony Scott, the very director who shaped this film. They lived happily together with their twin sons until 2012, when Tony Scott passed away. 2. The rivalry was real. Do you remember the tension you saw between Cole Trickle and Rowdy Burns on screen? In reality, the conflict did not come from personal animosity, but from something more practical. Both actors threw themselves into the film with an extremely competitive spirit to preserve the authenticity of the NASCAR world. The actors carried a powerful competitive drive, and neither wanted to appear weaker in the racing scenes or the confrontational moments. That made every overtake, every glance, and every line of dialogue carry real energy rather than simple performance. There were moments when speed and ego rose together to such a level that the stunt coordinator had to intervene to ensure safety, because they were no longer merely acting out a race. They genuinely wanted to beat each other on the track. That competition pushed the scenes to a rare level of realism, where the boundary between character and real person almost disappeared. And as a result, the on-screen rivalry feels alive and tense, like a real race rather than a staged performance. Listen to film standing on the edge of failure. When Days of Thunder premiered in 1990, the expectations were enormous. The same team behind Top Gun, Tom Cruise at the peak of his stardom, a massive budget, and an aggressive marketing campaign. Then the box office numbers arrived. $157.9 million, only enough to barely break even. Just 5 months after the film's release, Paramount terminated its $300 million contract with Simpson Bruckheimer because the movie did not reach the level of success they themselves had created as the benchmark. That is the harsh reality of Hollywood. At that time, many believed Days of Thunder would quickly be forgotten. But then something happened. The thing that saved the film. When it was released on VHS, the home video market was booming. Audiences began renting the film and watching it again and again, rewinding the racing scenes, listening to the engines. After that, cable television brought Days of Thunder to a new generation. Repeated primetime broadcasts and weekend airings transformed the film from a box office underperformer into a familiar name in popular culture. Days of Thunder still turned a profit thanks to the international market and more than $40 million in VHS rentals. And the racing scenes became iconic.